By what?
By a dump truck full of money.
Thank you.
There are, in fact, problems that can be solved with that. Not all, but some. And there are plenty of biblical examples. In the Acts of the Apostles, the early church put it upon themselves to help out widows and orphans in the community that they were in, people who were in need. Paul, in the letter to the Corinthians, takes up a collection because a plague has hit Jerusalem, and the Christians there are starving, and so he's taking up a collection amongst Gentile churches to then give money to starving people in the Jewish Jerusalem churches. Not only as an act of Christian charity, but to also show the Jewish Christians that Gentile Christians get it. There are a million examples of this in Scripture. It's all over the place. A lot of what happens in Scripture are acts of mercy. A person is in need, and a person responds to that need. And let me just be really clear. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing whatsoever. I don't want to say that one ministry is better than another. Oftentimes, mercy ministries keep people alive to survive another day. Justice ministries are attempts to implement systemic change in society. They raise the bigger questions. They tackle the more complicated issues. And as such, they oftentimes move away from a personal encounter to a somewhat more abstracted societal concept. We're no longer talking about one person's medical debt. We're talking about an entire institutional system. So we move ourselves from the very small and granular to the very large, conceptual. In the process, that also means that it is almost inevitably very complicated. Very, very complicated. I remember having a conversation recently with someone who will go nameless, but we were discussing the Kensington Initiative. I was talking about ministry versus justice and how it's one thing to help people who are homeless. It's another thing to ask the question, why are there so many homeless people on the streets of Kensington? And this person said, well, Trinity can't do anything about that. That is absolutely correct. But could Trinity be a part of a movement to get our communities to do more for people who are suffering from mental health and substance abuse addiction issues? Absolutely. But it's super complicated. Because the issue about homelessness in a nutshell is that we're a society that appreciates freedom. We are. That's one of the highest values that we have in our American society. We love freedom. We think that freedom has an intrinsic value to it, which means that you're also free to not take your meds. And as long as we allow people a degree of personal agency, which we're not willing to sacrifice, people are going to continue to be able to be afflicted by mental health and substance abuse issues, which will then make them incapable of being present in a sustained housing situation. So this is where it starts to get really sticky. Now, how about a great biblical example of a justice ministry? I'm going to give you one that you may not have heard of. We're going to talk about the 5th chapter of the book of Nehemiah. Now, anybody familiar with this story? Oh, all right. It's all right. I wasn't either. So quick context. Nehemiah is a Jewish person living in the royal courts of Babylon during the closing years of the exile. In fact, actually, the Jewish people have been restored to Jerusalem. He's a cupbearer for the king. He's basically like a steward. And he's heard stories about Jerusalem and how the walls have been destroyed and the community's been flattened, and he's very sad about this. And he really feels like God is saying to him, hey, this is a really huge problem. And the emperor looks at him and says, why are you so sad, my beloved cupbearer? And he says, oh, because the city of Jerusalem's in shambles. And the king says, you know what, go to Jerusalem and tell them it's okay for them to rebuild their stuff. And so Nehemiah goes in the book of Nehemiah to Jerusalem and says, hey, let's start rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, the walls, the temple, everything else. Great. At some point, though, Nehemiah becomes aware of something. The nobility who were in exile return back to Jerusalem as the nobility. They're basically fiefs now. They're feudal underlings of the king, but they're still royalty. They're still nobility. They still enjoy their position in society, and they get to reclaim most of their assets. Everybody else who is not a member of the nobility, who is hauled off into exile and come back, has nothing. Their lands are gone, their homes are gone, their possessions are gone. They have nothing to start with. And so in order to survive, what do? They borrow money, because that's what you do when you're poor and you need to get by. You borrow money. And they borrowed money from the nobility, who in turn then charge them interest, because that's what people who lend money do. Only the interest is so overwhelming and crippling that even the people who were poor to begin with are now even into more poverty, and in order to deal with this, they are selling their children into slavery. Especially, it's highlighted in the text, our daughters, suggesting that the slavery is particularly untoward. And Nehemiah goes and confronts the authority figures and says, listen, these are your Jewish brothers and sisters. We have all come out of the exile together. We all want to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, but you are crippling them by charging them usurious rates for loans. Because I don't know if you know this, but the Bible, in the first 5 books of the Bible, says something about charging interest for loans. Do you know what it says? It's a sin. And he says, if you really care about your brothers and sisters in this community, you need to change your ways. And the nobility hears this, actually, amazingly enough, and says, you know, right? You're absolutely correct. We're canceling all loans. Every single loan is forgiven. Which, as you might imagine, is a massive societal impact on the people of Jerusalem. Nehemiah is able, through a compelling argument, the call to common identity, faithfulness, and morality, to get figures in authority to be willing to implement significant change. It's an amazing story of a person seeking justice for a community in the Bible. So much so that actually a lot of Christians refer to, when you gather together authority figures and you get a bunch of Christians together in one place to ask them to do something, they call it a Nehemiah assembly. You can Google it. There are, obviously, within both forms of ministry, certain qualities, pitfalls, concerns. Neither one of them is easy. In the case of mercy, probably one of the biggest critiques of mercy is it can sustain a system. A lot of times when we engage in mercy ministry, we have a person who has abundance giving something to a person who has scarcity. You need this. I have lots of this. I will give this to you so you can have this, but I still have this. So while your situation's better, my situation is largely unchanged. And moreover, and this is the part where sometimes you hear people say, but wait a minute, during certain kinds of ministry or service perpetuate dependence? Yes. Yes, they do, because there's no systemic change taking place in order to address those issues. Oftentimes, too, mercy is rather short-term. It's an immediate thing. It's not a long-term improvement. You're not making long-lasting changes. You're dealing with an immediate need. Again, no criticism. Everybody's like, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he'll live for the rest of his life. Well, that's only true of two things. Number one, if he survives starving while you're teaching him how to fish, and number two, if he's given the economic opportunities to make a living while fishing. And if neither of those things are true, then it doesn't work. So don't preach to me your aphorisms. Give him the fish and teach him how to fish, and then give him the opportunities to enjoy fishing. That's justice and mercy together. The other part is, and this is where it's going to get kind of a little tense here, is sometimes mercy ministries are tools for colonialization. Now, I've used this term in outreach before, and they were like, wait, I need you to explain this to me. Allow me to do so. Sometimes well-intentioned ministries not only perpetuate harmful systems, they in fact reinforce them. The Anglican Church, historically, was a church of the British Empire. It just was. I'm not being mean to us. That's our history. We were the church if the British Empire. If you were in the British Empire, you went to an Anglican church. The Anglican Church provided the theological reinforcement for colonialization around the world. Hey, it's okay for us to go ahead and colonize around people. They need to learn about Jesus. We need to save their souls. Us taking over their communities, their cultures, subsuming them entirely and taking all their stuff, that's God's will. There are other situations in which the act of mercy may in fact actually benefit the colonizer. I'm going to give two examples, one a bit far and one very close. Ellen DeGeneres. Now, I'm not making any comments about Ellen DeGeneres as a person or human being, but she had a bit where she would ask celebrities trivia questions, and for every question right, we're going to donate $1,000 to this women's charity. You guys ever seen her do that? Ever watched this on the show? This was a bit. Do it right, earn money for charity. Until one day this actor, the guy who played Fez on that 70s show, who's also in NCIS, said, "Why don't you give it to them anyways? Whether or not I answer the question correctly or not. Why don't you give it to them anyways, whether or not I ask the question or not?" Because Ellen's giving of this money builds to the drama, which puts eyes on the screen. So she's making more money having you watching these people play for money for charity than she's actually losing and giving the charity money away. Her charitable act actually, in a backwards way, benefits her. Let me give you another one, and this one chaps my hide like nobody's business. The grocery store. Oh, I swear to God, I'm going to try to get this without losing my religion. You get to the end of the grocery store, you have scanned all of your own groceries, and then at the very end of it, it says, "Would you like to round up for $1 to support local charities, usually involving children or people in need?" Hit no. Hit no every flippin' time. And allow me to tell you why. Because that's your money that Giant is going to donate then to a charitable organization, get the tax write-off and the PR thing. When they hand that Giant check off to that organization, that's your money. That's not their money. I want to be like, hey, I got an idea. How about you pay 20 cents to the charity and I'll keep mine? Because I'm working my butt off to pay for groceries these days. You pay for it. But no, they get the tax write-off and the publicity. So stop doing it. If you're going to donate 20 cents, put it in the offering plate or the UTO thank offering box or someplace else where you get the direct benefit and somebody else doesn't get the plan off of it. That's how sometimes these things are colonialistic in nature. They exploit vulnerable people in the guise of doing things that are right. How do you avoid that? Super easy. Local leadership, local location of ministry, and constant critique from outside sources. Ask other people if you're doing the right thing. Ask the people you help, are you doing the right thing? Make sure that you're not accidentally giving Giant a PR stunt while they play upon your tendency to, when you buy things, you want to spend more money. There's a psychology to that. Just don't do it. Oh, it makes me so mad. Questions? Let me pause there. I just did a dump. I'm going to talk about the pitfalls of justice here in a minute. If you go and tell me real quickly how much Ellen DeGeneres didn't deserve that critique, that's fine. But there's a microphone up here with John if anybody has a question here at this point. I know we're rolling hard like a black train. Okay, we'll keep going. To engage in justice ministry often requires deep resources, which is why a lot of times it is best from a scale perspective to engage with multiple institutions tackling these issues. You're right, Trinity Church cannot by itself sometimes implement major systemic change, but all the Episcopal churches in Bucks County, or the diocese can, or all the churches in Bucks County, or this part of the state can, I mean, people of faith can come together and they can suddenly start being a very loud voice, but it sometimes takes bringing a lot of people together. It also takes a huge commitment, because these are not one-off, let's just go protest once and everything's going to be fixed. No, this is oftentimes a deep, protracted, frustrating, unsatisfying process. Because when you start talking about justice, you are, in the words of the Reverend Walter Brueggemann, Lutheran theologian, professor, and pastor, sometimes challenging pharaohs. Sometimes it's not a sympathetic audience. Sometimes there are people out there, that guy who's throwing babies in the bridge is probably not just going to want to stop. He will probably resist you in your attempt to keep him from throwing babies in the water for whatever reason that might be. Oftentimes we're up against apathy, fear, homeostasis, and power. It's a tough gig. It's a tough gig. And in addition to that, you often then end up with conflicting ideas about what solutions actually might occur or might be present here. Let me give you a real-life example. This is a complicated story, but here we go. When I was in my church in Kansas, I was one of the founding pastors of a group called Justice Matters. This was a ecumenical organization that decided to come together to tackle shared interests of social change. And I will tell you that this was organized under an umbrella agency called DART, D-A-R-T, you can look it up. DART is a national organization that promotes the use of certain curricula to how groups can advocate for social change. So they'll tell you how to organize this. I have complicated relationships with DART. So before you go and say, well, Rob's telling us to form a DART group. But DART does exist. They do a lot of good work. So we all came together, myself, the Baptists, the Lutherans, the Catholics, the black church that thought we were all a cult, and the Muslim Student Union all came together to tackle issues about early childhood support for education, low-income housing, and providing better mental health resources to the community. We thought those were all ma, pa, and apple pie. And we could all come together and say, those are all good ideas. Nobody thinks that those are bad ideas. And so then we began to problem solve about what we might do about it. So one of the things we did was we actually went to the city and got them to establish an $8 million fund to help offset low-income housing for people. Because in a college town, low-income housing is as rare as rocking horse poop. Now, what happened, you like that? I could have gone with heads, teeth, but I thought I'd jar. You guys look a little sleepy. I thought I'd jar you there a little bit. Anyways, so what happened, though, was that during this time, the county decided that they were going to create a new prison, a big prison there in Douglas County that was going to cost a lot of money. And there were people that were in Justice Matters who said, we're not fans of mass incarceration. Mass incarceration is an issue in American society. Something like 1 out of every single-digit fraction of Americans are incarcerated in a rate that does not exist anywhere else in the world. Like, this is a big issue. We are not fans of the idea of building even yet another larger prison in our county. Only not everybody thought that. There were some people who were like, wait a minute, building this prison will provide jobs for architects, for construction workers, for people who are going to work at the prison, for people who are going to serve the institutional needs of the prison. There's going to be people moving into the community as a result. Like, a large prison is an economic opportunity that we should not be steering away from. And then suddenly, even churches which tended to always kind of agree with each other, like the UCC church across the street, suddenly found themselves divided over this issue. Because now it's really complicated. So then, Justice Matters goes ahead and starts engaging in the community and churches and members of the county and other authority figures. We talked to the architects, we did all this work, and we arranged for there to be a referendum, because the law said you can get a referendum if you get enough signatures, that would have a smaller prison built and then have the resources that would have been put into the larger prison reallocated to community mental health institutions and training our police officers on how to deal with mental health crises in a first contact sort of way. Because honestly, a lot of people who are mentally ill find themselves pipelined into prison, not into rehabilitative therapeutic facilities. So if you have a person who's a police officer dealing with a person who's aggressive, their first instinct might be to tase them, cuff them, and stuff them, or they could actually use their training to engage in mental health first aid in order to ascertain they're actually having a crisis and then get them to the hospital, the community mental health agency, wherever they might need to go. And we thought, a lot of us thought that was a pretty darn good compromise, except for the people that were violently opposed to the prison. The hardliners were like, no, no prison, no. And suddenly now Justice Matters is divided. I had the surreal experience of watching mental health professionals arguing with anti-prison activists over this referendum. And that, it was extremely complicated, extremely disruptive. It was a huge mess. I will say eventually the resolution passed, or the referendum passed. The prison was built. Money did go into Burt Nash and other places. The police officers received that training. And I'll tell you right now, I saw what it meant to have police officers who could deal with mental health crises in a way that was beneficial. And not just, well, they're fighting me. Bzz. Made a difference. But there were still people who were vociferously against it. This is the challenge of justice-oriented ministries. They can be very complicated. They require patience and communication, all of these things. And oftentimes, the resolution is unsatisfactory. Because the unfortunate end of this story is that actually, a few years after all this happened, there was a shift in billing policies, and our community health center was completely gutted and stopped existing. Stupidest reason in the world. Blue Cross Blue Shield started during the pandemic, Blue Cross Blue Shield started paying out insurance policies to MSWs and LSWs for providing counseling because they thought they were doing a good thing. And then suddenly every person who worked for Burt Nash could make more money hanging their shingle out and being a therapist that billed insurance rather than working for an institution that received community money. The best laid plans of mice and men. We know from our own experiences that looking at things like the civil rights struggle or the move for equality amongst women or rights for LGBT people, that you take these steps forward, you experience these steps back, you keep going. It never seems to come to a complete, easily tied up with the bow conclusion. That's part of what it means to struggle for justice. It's hard. So with this paradigm in mind, we ask ourselves the question, first of all, what are we as a church doing? We do lots of things. Some of these things are mercy ministries. Some of these things may be justice ministries. I will tell you, historically, churches have found themselves more comfortable with mercy ministries. And I think that's reflected in not just this church, but every church. But I think part of this discussion that I'm hearing a lot of people talk about where they say, gosh, I wish the church was doing something. What I think they're really saying is, I wish we were doing more justice ministries, not necessarily more mercy ministries. This in some ways is the whole punchline in some ways of this conversation for me. Because I've been sitting here going like, we do lots of stuff. But I think there are people who are saying, yes, but we want to take up the challenge to pursue justice. not just acts of mercy. But in doing so, realizing that we're going to begin to walk on a very challenging path. I'm going to now pause again. I feel like I'm just railing up here. I'll pause for a minute for questions, comments, any feedback whatsoever. And there's a microphone up here, so you don't mind taking it. That way people who are watching online can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Within our church, we do have some ministries that do address these kinds of systemic justice problems. Episcopal Community Services does that on a state level. And Episcopal Public, I'm not going to get the other P,
The Public
Policy Network, EPPN, is another one that really works on legislature. Both of them are very easy to participate in. I would love it if I saw you get out your phones and write down EPPN, Episcopal Public Policy Network. You can register so quickly. They will email you what is up for a vote or what they are litigating for, what they are pushing for. They will give you the bill numbers, and then they'll tell you what the bill is about in layman's terms, so you understand. Then they will provide your legislature's contact information, and you can electronically sign a survey, not a survey, a petition right then. And they will receive that. You'll get a response back. They receive that. Better, I'm going to fall over. Startling idea is that you can, knowing the bill's number, you can call your representative and speak to them about this issue. And I've always heard representatives' offices say they listen to the person that calls because a person who takes the time to call is going to take the time to vote. So that makes a difference to them. So, and you can pray for it. Episcopal Public Policy Network, EPPN, and Episcopal Community Services, ECS.
That might be. I might have a follow-up to Ann's comments, and I'm wondering when you're interested in an organization that is providing a justice service, of how can you properly vet these organizations to make sure that their mission in providing this justice is true,
right,
and not causing justice for one group at the expense of another?
I think that I wish I could say, just go to this website. It will tell you everything you need to know about this. There are websites that do track charitable organizations about the kind of work they do, what their overhead is versus how much their money is. But I think, especially in this day and age where there's so much data, both false and true, out there, I mean, the only answer is to just put the time in, to do the research, to talk to people who are close to the situation, to ask people who you trust, who are people who know about sound judgment. We have a canon for social justice in this diocese. Tania Smythe, who's been here many times. I mean, in theory, she should be somebody who's able to provide those kind of resources for us. I think the question you have doesn't have an easy answer. It just takes the time to do all that kind of work. And like I say, it's a complex process there. I will say this: regardless of how complex it is, and how hard it is, and how frustrating it can be, I do think it is the call to the church to change the world, not just to address the short-term issues that are present there. We don't need to perpetuate systems. We're called to make things different. And historically, the church has sometimes embraced that or shied away from it, to the good or ill of us and our reputation in society. So I'm just saying, like, I think, even though Alba doesn't sound like I'm trying to wave you off of justice ministry, I try to give a realistic depiction of it, but I think that on the other hand, the world needs us. So be people of good faith. Questions? Yes, Terry, microphone up here. Again, please don't forget to introduce yourself, especially if you're on vestry.
I'm Terry Reynolds. I have a question about something that feels upstream to me as a way to sort of put in place a chance for people to avoid poverty. And I'm curious whether you would consider it to be justice. And that's supporting a school. For example, St. James Episcopal School in Northwest Philadelphia. Or I know Dave has briefly mentioned in vestry about a mission school that's just been, I think recently. Right, so I'm just curious how you view that.
Okay, sure. So, my parents were both educators, so obviously I'm a strong proponent in the value of education, especially public education. I think that when we talk about systems, part of the system that oppresses people in our society are the denial of opportunities for things like education and vocational training, housing opportunities, loans. If you know anything about redlining, anybody know what this phrase means? Most of you are good. Redlining was the way in which banks would devalue certain real estate holdings that were owned by minorities who had bought their homes through the GI Bill, so that the generational wealth of home ownership was robbed from them as a result of that. So they were then forced to live in poor communities that had less resources. And since we structure a lot of times our educational system on local taxes to fund things rather than upon larger scale stuff, because again, we support local democracy, so we want small school boards, not big school boards. Don't even get me going. That then people are denied educational opportunities when education is the number one qualifier for financial success in the future. All the people who talk about training their sons and daughters to become plumbers, nothing against plumbing, but college education could, one, provide more care for children who have special needs, and two, provide an opportunity for people who are from lower income families to be able to have their children participate in a qualified high-end preschool program in order to provide educational opportunities for those children. We don't have that yet, but that would be a wonderful way for us to do something like that. When I was the chaplain at Bishop Seabury Academy, which was a private Episcopal school, they made an intentional effort to provide scholarships for students who could come then and try to have a different educational experience what they would get in the public schools. So I think that, I understand that I've tried to make some inroads with the public schools a little bit to connect with them, and then there's some church and state issues, and always that concern that I'm a bad actor because they don't know me. Is Reverend Rob going to come in and start telling these kids are going to go to hell unless they become Episcopalian? We might laugh, but they don't know us from Adam's house cat. But certainly in the ways which we support this school, the Bucks County IU, there's lots of institutions that I think deserve our community support that are right now facing drastic funding cuts as a result of decisions that are being made by people in power. I don't know why we're gutting our children's future, but here we are. So yes, I'm a big proponent in education as a major way in which people can experience a societal change. Plus, a more educated populace is a more understanding, compassionate populace as well, but I digress. Yes, Ardith, and again, microphone.
I really like the framework of justice and mercy.
Can you share your name real quick for me?
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Ardith Talbot. Pretty long-time member of Trinity here, and I live here in Solebury.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So I really do like that framework very much, because there are both immediate needs, and I think places like A Woman's Place and our Kensington project that we've supported for many, many years are sort of fall into the mercy area, at least in my mind, Whereas Bucks County Opportunity Council and ECS, with their emphasis on housing and economic security, bringing people out of poverty and helping them secure jobs and cars and those kinds of things, I think are more fall into the area of justice. I really like what was just brought up about education. I would almost see, plugging into, we're a small community here, and I think our efforts could go further by partnering with organizations like Bucks County Opportunity Council and even the United Way, which does a lot of scholarships for daycare, so that women who are low-income women can go out and get jobs and work, and they have a place for daycare. I mean, the cost of daycare is skyrocketing. Women can't afford to get a job because they have to stay home and take care of their children.
Right.
Anyway, that's all I have.
Appreciate that. Thank you. James, sorry, in the back.
James Wells, former warden. I survived like Kevin did, so we're in good shape. And sorry about the star of the British Empire here, my apologies. I think one of the things when you think about what we can do is to make a distinction between theology, which is a word that's become very popular recently, and religion. And not that they aren't very, very important, but people say, well, how do you do theology? Well, you have to read Latin a little bit and some Greek, and then you have to do the church. No, you don't. It's a simple question of what is God about in what I'm facing right now? Whether it's an act of mercy, and are you encouraging dependency, or whatever you're facing, or what they're doing. Where is God about in that? What do I understand of God? And the first thing we do is come back and think about ourselves. And I think that sense of just openness to the question of where is God speaking to me in this? And I think that's really important because probably my biggest limitation in sin is what you would identify as, you might say, philanthropy exhaustion, as in there's so many things we want to get out there and be part of, and because God is sort of there and we want to be there, that we get exhausted and we become kind of diffuse. And so part of that question is, where is God? Is God so convincingly present in this for me that I want to stay here and commit to it and push through with it, even as warden, as difficult as some of that was. But, to pick where we're going to be in like the organization like United Way is a wonderful organization, ECS. I mean, they're out there, but we have to, I think personally, just face the fact, where is God asking us to be, and focus our effort and energy to just be that, as it were, for God. So my question isn't to define religion versus theology, but you got the point.
I think so. Dave? Not so much.
Hi, I'm Dave Griffith, a longtime parishioner, former executive director of ECS, and a trustee of the diocese. I got to share kind of my litmus test on outreach. One of the things that we did at ECS is we took a hard look at whether we wanted to be in the maintenance business or we wanted to be in the transformation business. One of the really ugly things about poverty is that it is multi-generational, for whether it's red line, public policy, all those things. And I would urge you to think about the need for both ministries, whether it's you have a number of organizations. There's 1,400 organizations in Philadelphia that claim they work on poverty. 1,400. 90% of those have less than 6 weeks cash on hand. Of those, the bulk of their expense goes to pay themselves or their staff. And so there is this ethos in our region, and particularly Philadelphia, that they exist more for payroll than they do to serve their clients. And they make compelling cases, but there's a need to really dig deep and understand an organization you're going to support and what is their mission, what is their sustainability, and what is the evidence for what they do. Take the politics out of it. What is the impact they deliver to the individuals they serve? And if they can't tell you, I would urge you to back off. There's just, and it's something, having been in the weeds for a long, long time and seen literally millions of dollars go to organizations that don't deliver impact. It really, what was it, chaps your hide?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but it sounds good. The other thing that I would urge you deeply to think about is the role of advocacy. And we've mentioned that a couple of times. There are organizations like Children's First that advocate for children in our state. And the way I have often thought about it, and ECS has an advocacy department, and we worked on a number of things to change the law. When you help one person, you move one person. When you change the law, you impact everybody that is under that piece. And so when you get a request for advocacy, I hope you understand it, that you take it on and you act. Right now, living wage in Philadelphia is $7.50, in Pennsylvania rather, is $7.50 an hour. Believe it or not, that is among the lowest of any state in the nation. Living wage is probably now $20 an hour. Used to be 18 a couple years ago when I knew the numbers better. But advocacy and putting our vote to work and advocating for friends and peers to vote and pressure state, Senate, state representatives, the governor, is incredibly important. And there are organizations that are in Harrisburg knocking on doors and being very fact-driven and driving the base. And I would hope that our advocacy work here is something that we would join. And I would love to see the diocese take it on. It's like touching the third rail. But there are other denominations that do it way better than the Episcopal Church, although I'm starting to see a dramatic change. But look for impact. Look for impact, ask for data, and then time, talent, and treasure makes a huge difference. But you want to see the budget, you want to see how it's spent, and you want to see the impact on the kids or the adults or wherever they go. And if they don't meet that test, I would tell you, feel good is not enough. See evidence.
Thanks. We're running out of time here a bit, but I want to talk for a minute about what comes next. Right now, your outreach committee, your vestry, has taken up the charge to ask themselves the question, as was phrased by Bishop Craig Loya from the Diocese of Minnesota, good friend. What does love require of us now? We only have so much resources, so much money, so much person hours, so much time, so much compassion, even that's a finite resource. We continually partner with organizations in the community. We continue to do other outreach ministry outside of that. A lot of times that's been done by long-standing relationships which could almost be described as habit. We are rightfully being faithful stewards by critically examining the question, what is love requiring of us as a church in terms of community engagement? And my goal in having this conversation is to allow the congregation, the outreach committee, and the vestry to ask themselves questions like, How much of our resources do we want to have go towards mercy-oriented ministries, and how much do we want to have go towards justice-oriented ministries? How much of the ministries do we want to have be present in our immediate community? How much do we want to have it be present in the diocese? How much do we want to have it be present nationally or internationally? And to really break down in a fairly clear way our understanding of what we do and how we're doing it. And this is a thing where the vestry is talking about it, the outreach committee is talking about it, they're talking to each other about it, they're talking about 2027. Can you believe it? 2027. And wanting to come forward with a cohesive, faithful, well thought out, and well communicated and shared plan with all of you. So where's my outreach committee members? I know a lot of you are committing to trying to be here with us today. Thank you for that. All right, where are my vestry members? Also well represented. I normally forbid parking lot conversations here at the church because I sometimes feel like those could lead us up to no good. I'm going to say, no, I want a parking lot conversation. I want you all to talk to each other outside of this gathering to say, hey, I would really love to see us do more of this kind of ministry work, mercy, justice, this kind of issue, this area. We're all, much like in Justice Matters, the final answer is going to be a complicated one that not everybody's going to be happy with. But I want us to start talking about it in these terms, because I feel like there is a cry for justice as much as there is a cry for mercy, and that both are needed of us here as the church today. We have to discern, and I'll talk more about spiritual gifts next month, but one of the gifts is the discernment of spirits. What is the Spirit calling us to do here now? That's a gift, which some of you may possess. And so talk to each other a lot. Phone calls, emails, whatever. I'm encouraging, not gossiping, but inter-church communication about these issues because I think the good stuff's going to bubble up. And I think this allows us to talk about this in some very clear ways. Does that make sense? All right. I will say, in a normal world, this would be a great open office hours conversation to have with me. My schedule's a little clunky right now because I'm going to be out of town on church conferences, but I will be around some. I'll be responding to emails. I would love to talk to us about you as well if you have thoughts you want to share with me outside of this particular context. Let's close with a word of prayer. Oh, I'm sorry, what? I know, but we're out of time, and I have to be respectful of that. Plus, I feel like we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours if we wanted to, which is not a bad thing. I think included with the prayers of the people, we should be praying about our mission as a thing we lift up these days, because I think this is a serious question we're asking ourselves. Let's say that I'm going to pray first for the mission of the church, which is found on page 838. The Lord be with you. Almighty God, you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, to reconcile the world to yourself. We praise and bless you for those whom you have sent in the power of the Spirit to preach the gospel to all nations. We thank you that in all parts of the earth, the community of love has been gathered together by their prayers and labors, and that in every place your servants call upon your name. For the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours forever. Amen. And then, following that, page 823. I actually knew a priest who said he prays this every day. O God, our Father, whose Son forgave his enemies while he was suffering shame and death, strengthen those who suffer for the sake of conscience. When they are accused, save them from speaking in hate. When they are rejected, save them from bitterness. When they are imprisoned, save them from despair. And to us, your servants, give grace to respect their witness and to discern the truth, that our society may be cleansed and strengthened. This we ask for the sake of Jesus Christ, our merciful and righteous judge. Amen. Thank you all for this time. Thank you for those of you who are watching online. Your thoughts and reflections are always welcome as well. And again, thank you for the conversation here, and hopefully more to come.